In a forgotten corner of the city, a weary homeless man was about to face a storm he could not outrun. A quiet night of pushing his shopping cart turned deadly when the Serpent's biker gang closed in, circling with engines roaring and cruelty on their minds. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical passerby. For decades, he was a martial artist and special forces trainer, known for turning impossible odds into decisive victories. When the Serpents kicked over Samuel Jenkins' cart and prepared to humiliate him further, they had no idea they were provoking the wrong witness. Norris stepped forward with calm precision, delivering a response that would ignite a ripple of fear through the gang and hope through the crowd. What began as an act of bullying against a defenseless man would become a lesson in respect and consequence. The streets of Harmon Avenue would never be the same after Chuck Norris made his stand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last streetlight on Harmon Avenue flickered erratically, threatening to surrender to the darkness that had already claimed most of this forgotten corner of the city. It was well past midnight, that hollow hour, when even the most restless souls sought shelter, leaving the cracked pavement to ghosts and those with nowhere else to go. Samuel Jenkins pushed his shopping cart slowly down the center of the empty street, each squeaking wheel mapping the jagged terrain of potholes and broken asphalt. The cart moved like an extension of his weathered body, deliberate, careful, protective of its contents. Inside lay everything he owned: 3 blankets for the coming winter, a tattered photo album rescued from his eviction, clothes folded with military precision, and a collection of aluminum cans that represented tomorrow's meal if the recycling center was feeling generous. His eyes still sharp, despite his 68-year scanned the shadows from habit. The city changed at night, transformed predator and prey with each passing hour. Samuel knew his place in that ecosystem all too well. Keep moving. Stay alert. Become invisible when necessary. A distant rumble broke the silence, too mechanical to be thunder. Samuel's shoulders tensed as he recognized the sound: motorcycles, multiple engines coming fast. Experience had taught him to find cover when that particular storm approached, but the nearest alley was half a block away, and his right knee hadn't worked properly since sleeping in the drainage tunnel last winter. He quickened his pace as much as his body allowed, metal wheels protesting louder against the pavement. The engines grew closer, multiplied, the growl becoming a roar that bounced between brick buildings and empty storefronts. Headlights suddenly flooded the street behind him, stretching his shadow into a grotesque giant before him. Samuel didn't look back. Looking back invited contact. He kept his eyes forward, hands firmly on the cart's handle, focused on reaching the recessed doorway of the abandoned hardware store ahead. Just 20 more steps. The first motorcycle shot past, close enough that the wind of its passing tugged at his coat. A second followed, then a third, circling back in a choreographed dance of intimidation. Samuel kept moving, eyes down, invisible. The fourth rider came so close that Samuel could smell the leather and cigarettes, could feel the heat radiating from the engine. "What have we got here, boys?" A voice called out, amplified by the empty street. "Looks like we found ourselves the night janitor." Laughter erupted as the bikes tightened their circle, creating a carousel of noise and light around Samuel and his cart. 7 riders in total, their faces hidden behind helmets and the glare of their headlights, but their intentions clear in the way they revved their engines and called to one another. "Quite the treasure chest you're pushing there, old-timer," another voice shouted. "Mind if we take a look at your collection?" Samuel kept walking, slower now as the bikes cut closer, forcing him to stop and start, to navigate the shrinking pathway they allowed. His weathered hands gripped the cart handle tighter, knuckles white beneath the dirt and calluses. "I don't want any trouble," Samuel said, voice barely audible above the engines. The words weren't meant to be heard, just an incantation to ward off what was coming, a prayer to whatever God watched over the forgotten. The largest bike, a black and chrome machine that growled like a beast, pulled directly in front of Samuel, forcing him to stop. The rider was massive, filling out his leather jacket with the kind of bulk that came from prison yards and backroom fights. He removed his helmet, revealing a face adorned with a thick beard, and eyes that gleamed with the particular joy of someone who'd found entertainment in a dull night. Trouble? The man's voice carried the rasp of cigarettes and whiskey. Why would there be trouble? We're just being neighborly. Checking out your establishment here. He dismounted with surprising grace for his size, boots hitting the pavement with authority. The other bikes slowed to an idle, their riders forming an audience for what was clearly a familiar performance. Name's Viper, the man said, tapping his chest where a snake insignia was emblazoned on his jacket. These are the serpents, and you're rolling through our territory without paying the toll. Samuel said nothing. Gaze fixed on his cart, years of experience teaching him that words seldom helped in situations like this. The unspoken rules of the street were clear. Surviving meant becoming small, becoming nothing, offering no resistance that might add sport to cruelty. Viper circled the cart, inspecting its contents with exaggerated interest. Let's see what we've got here. Some fine rags. What's this? A photo album? Sentimental type, huh? He poked at the blankets with a gloved finger. And what's underneath all this junk? Samuel moved between Viper and the cart, a small act of courage that surprised even him. Please, he said, voice steadier than he felt. These are my things. The statement hung in the air, simple and profound in its dignity. Viper's smile widened, revealing a gold tooth that caught the streetlight. Your things? He repeated, voice lifting in mock surprise. Well, boys, the man says these are his things. He turned back to Samuel, leaning close enough that Samuel could smell the beer on his breath. Here's the problem, old-timer. I don't see a receipt. I don't see a property deed. And I definitely don't see you paying to roll your little flea market through serpent territory. From down the street, the sound of voices and movement drew closer. The commotion had begun to attract attention late-night bar patrons, insomniacs, the curious and the bored drifting toward the scene like moths to the harsh light of the motorcycles. A small crowd began to form at the periphery, some with phones raised, others with hands in pockets, all maintaining the careful distance of those unwilling to become involved but unable to look away. Maybe he's got cash stashed in there, one of the riders called out, a wiry man with tattoos climbing up his neck like ivy. Check under the blankets. Nah, Viper replied, eyes still locked on Samuel. I think our friend here deals in merchandise, not money. He turned to the gathering crowd, playing to them now. What do you think, folks? Should we help the man lighten his load? Make it easier for him to push? Some in the crowd laughed nervously. Others looked away, studying the cracks in the sidewalk with sudden interest. A few drifted back, already regretting their curiosity. No one spoke up. Samuel's hands remained on the cart, a quiet defiance in the face of the inevitable. The years had taken his home, his family, his strength, but not his dignity. Not yet. I think, Viper continued, turning back to Samuel, that we should give you a lesson in traveling light. With that, he kicked the side of the Carthard. The impact sent it tipping, tottering for a moment on two wheels before crashing onto its side. The contents spilled across the street, clothes tumbling into a puddle, cans clattering and rolling, the photo album landing open, pages fluttering in the night breeze. Samuel dropped to his knees, reaching first for the album, gathering the scattered photos with trembling hands. Each one was irreplaceable: his wife's smile, his daughter's graduation, moments from a life that felt increasingly like someone else's memory. The serpents laughed, circling on their bikes, headlights illuminating the scene like a cruel stage play. One rider revved his engine and drove through the scattered belongings, sending cans flying further down the street. Now it's street art, Viper announced, arms spread wide as if presenting a masterpiece. Much more interesting this way, don't you think? Samuel continued gathering his possessions silently, dignity in each careful movement, each item rescued from the gutter. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the commotion and the unmistakable energy of public humiliation. Some filmed with their phones, others whispered to each other. A few looked uncomfortable but remained rooted in place. Among them stood a man who hadn't been there moments before. Average height, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in jeans and a denim jacket. Nothing to distinguish him from any other onlooker, except for his complete stillness amid the shifting crowd. His face, framed by close-cropped reddish-brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard, remained impassive as he observed the cenote with the voyeuristic interest of the other bystanders, but with the measured assessment of someone calculating distances, angles, and intentions. Chuck Norris had been walking back to his hotel after a late dinner when he heard the commotion. Unlike the others who had drifted toward the spectacle out of curiosity or boredom, he moved with purpose, drawn by the imbalance of power that radiated from the scene like heat. He stood now at the edge of the light, watching as the old man knelt in the street, salvaging what he could of his life, while the bikers circled and jeered. Chuck didn't move, didn't speak. Not yet. His eyes tracked each biker, noting positions, behaviors, the subtle hierarchies evident in their formation. He recognized the pattern SPAC mentality, the performance of dominance, the safety of numbers. In his 60 years of studying human conflict, from competitive fighting to war zones, he had seen this dynamic play out countless times. The difference tonight was that he was here to witness it. And unlike the crowd of passive onlookers, Chuck Norris never just watched. Viper, animated by the attention and his own sense of control, strutted back toward Samuel, who was struggling to right his cart while keeping his gathered possessions from spilling again. "You know what I think would really improve this art installation?" Viper asked loudly, playing to his gang and the crowd. "A little water feature." He grabbed a half-empty beer bottle from one of his companions and began pouring it over Samuel's carefully folded clothes. The liquid soaked through quickly, carrying with it the stench of stale alcohol and malice. Samuel didn't respond, didn't look up, continuing his task with the singular focus of someone who had weathered storms before and would weather this one too. His silence, his refusal to provide the reaction Viper craved, seemed to irritate the gang leader more than any resistance could have. "Hey!" Viper's voice sharpened, the playfulness evaporating. "I'm talking to you, old man." He grabbed Samuel's shoulder, forcing him to look up. "Don't you know it's rude to ignore people?" Chuck took one step forward, then another, moving with deliberate calm through the ring of onlookers. He didn't rush, didn't announce himself, just stepped into the pool of harsh motorcycle light, his presence rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. A few people recognized him, nudging companions and whispering, but most remained fixed on the drama unfolding in the street. Viper, still focused on Samuel, didn't notice Chuck's approach until a path had cleared between them, conversations dying as Chuck moved through the crowd. The gang leader looked up, irritated by the shift in attention, and found himself staring at a man whose quiet stance somehow commanded more authority than all Viper's noise and motion. For a moment, the scene froze. Viper's hand still on Samuel's shoulder, the old man half crouched by his overturned cart, the bikers idling in a loose circle, and Chuck standing motionless at the edge of it all, his expression neither angry nor afraid, simply present and aware. Then Viper's face changed, recognition dawning as a smile spread across his features. Not the smile of respect, but the even more dangerous smile of someone who has just discovered a greater prize than expected. "Well, well," he said, releasing Samuel and turning fully toward Chuck. "Look who decided to join our little street party." He glanced back at his gang, making sure they appreciated the moment. If it isn't the legend himself, Chuck Norris. What's the matter, Hollywood? You lost? The crowd's murmuring intensified, the energy shifting as those who hadn't recognized Chuck now did, phones lifting higher to capture what suddenly promised to be something worth sharing. In the harsh glare of motorcycle headlights, against the backdrop of a dirty street and scattered belongings, two forces stood opposed on, loud and chaotic, the other still and contained. And in that moment, before either man moved or spoke again, everyone present sensed the invisible line that had just been crossed. The street fell into an uneasy hush, the kind that settles before a storm or a fight, pregnant with anticipation. Viper stood with his feet planted wide, hands resting on his belt buckle, in a pose of exaggerated confidence. Behind him, his gang members exchanged glances, their engines idling lower, as if even the machines sensed the shift in atmosphere. Chuck remained where he stood, seemingly untouched by the tension that electrified the air around him. His hands hung loosely at his sides, his posture neither defensive nor aggressive, simply ready. His eyes, sharp and assessing, moved from Viper to Samuel and back again, taking in every detail of the situation with practiced efficiency. Samuel had managed to right his cart, though many of his belongings remained scattered across the asphalt. He continued gathering them with methodical care, as if the confrontation brewing beside him was happening in another world. Only the occasional glance toward Chuck betrayed his awareness of the changing dynamic. "I asked you a question, Hollywood," Viper said, voice louder now, pitched to carry to the growing crowd. "You lost? Or are you slumming it tonight? Looking for inspiration for your next B-movie?" A few nervous laughs rippled through the onlookers, quickly fading into silence. Phones remained raised, recording, as people pressed closer, while simultaneously maintaining a safe distance from whatever might unfold. Chuck's gaze settled on Viper, his expression unchanged. When he finally spoke, his voice was even conversational almost, carrying no hint of challenge or fear. "The man's trying to collect his things," he said simply. Viper blinked, thrown by the mundane response. He'd expected anger, indignation, perhaps even fear, not this calm statement of the obvious. He recovered quickly, his smile widening to reveal that gold tooth again. "The man," he mimicked, jerking a thumb toward Samuel, "was just getting a lesson in street economics. Nothing that concerns you, old-timer." Chuck's eyes flicked briefly to Samuel, who had paused in his gathering to watch the exchange, then back to Viper. "I think it does concern me," he said, voice still measured. "It concerns everyone here." He gestured to the gathered crowd, with a small movement of his head. For the first time, many of the bystanders shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their role as passive witnesses to cruelty. A few looked away, unable to meet the implicit question in Chuck's words. "Why are you just watching?" Viper sensed the attention shifting, the spotlight drifting from him to this unexpected challenger. His expression hardened, the playful cruelty replaced by something more direct. "Look at that," he announced to his gang and the crowd. "Chuck Norris thinks he's going to save the day." He strode closer to Chuck, stopping just outside arm's reach. "You hear that, boys? We've got ourselves a real American hero tonight." The gang members revved their engines in response, creating a wall of noise that bounced off the buildings and amplified their presence. A few of them dismounted, forming a loose semicircle behind their leader, leather creaking as they moved, hands flexing in anticipation. "Tell me something, Mr. Walker, Texas Ranger," Viper continued, circling slightly, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a practiced performer. "Do you even know how to fight without a script? Without a stunt double? Without the magic of Hollywood editing?" He was playing to the crowd now, working them like a seasoned carnival barker. Some responded with jeers, others with uncomfortable silence. A murmur started, then swelled into a chant from a pocket of onlookers near the back. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Viper's eyes narrowed at the chant, but he pressed on, determined to control the narrative. Because out here, in the real world, things get messy. There's no second take. No director yelling cut when it gets too rough. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He moved closer still, testing boundaries. Out here, it's just flesh and bone, and who wants it more? Chuck hadn't moved during Viper's monologue, hadn't shifted his weight or changed his expression. He stood like a rock in a river, letting the words flow around him without effect. When he finally responded, it wasn't to Viper's taunts but to Samuel, who was struggling to retrieve a can that had rolled beneath one of the motorcycles. "Let me help you with that, sir," Chuck said, stepping past Viper as if the gang leader was simply an obstacle to navigate around. The dismissal was so complete, so casual, that it momentarily stunned Viper into silence. Chuck knelt beside Samuel, reaching for the can with efficient movement. As he handed it to the older man, their eyes met briefly, a moment of quiet dignity shared between two men who understood that strength didn't always announce itself with noise. "Thank you," Samuel said, voice rough with emotion that he quickly masked. "Appreciate it." Chuck nodded once, helping the man secure the last few items in his cart. The simple act of kindness, performed under the harsh glare of motorcycle headlights and the stares of dozens, carried more weight than any speech or challenge could have. Behind them, Viper's momentary shock gave way to fury. His theatrical flair vanished, replaced by the raw anger of someone unaccustomed to being ignored. "Hey!" he shouted, striding forward. "I'm talking to you, Norris." Chuck rose slowly, turning to face Viper with the same calm demeanor. "And I'm helping this gentleman," he replied. "You've done enough here tonight." Something in his tone, threatening, not even particularly forceful, but absolutely certain, caused several of the gang members to exchange uneasy glances. They had followed Viper into countless confrontations, had backed his play no matter how outrageous. But something about this situation felt different. The script had changed, and no one had given them the new pages. Viper sensed the wavering in his ranks and pushed harder, determined to regain control. "You think because you made a few movies, kicked a few stunt guys, that makes you something special?" He jabbed a finger toward Chuck's chest, stopping just short of actual contact. "Out here, you're just another old man pretending to be tough." Chuck's gaze dropped to the finger, pointed at his chest, then lifted back to Viper's face. He said nothing, but something in his eyes, a calm assessment perhaps, or simply the complete absence of fear, made Viper take a half step back despite himself. Recovering, the gang leader turned to the crowd, arms spread wide. "Look at him, the great Chuck Norris, too scared to even speak up." A few people laughed uncertainly, but most remained silent, watching the exchange with the kind of attention usually reserved for watching a fuse burn down. Phones remained up, recording every moment. One of the gang members, younger than the rest with a patchy beard that suggested he was trying too hard to look older, called out from his bike. "Maybe he's just a pussy after all, Viper. All those moves are probably CGI anyway." Encouraged by this support, Viper's confidence surged back. He turned again to Chuck, stepping close enough that the toes of their boots nearly touched. "What do you say to that, Norris? You gonna prove me wrong? Show everyone here what a real tough guy looks like?" His voice dropped lower, meant only for Chuck to hear. "Or are you just going to walk away and let everyone see what a fraud you really are?" The moment stretched, taut with potential energy. The crowd had fallen completely silent now, even the chants dying away, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Samuel had finished securing his cart and stood beside it, watching with the wariness of someone who had seen how quickly situations like this could turn deadly. Chuck's expression remained unchanged, his breathing steady. When he finally spoke, his voice carried easily through the silence. "There's nothing to prove here," he said simply. "You've had your fun. Now, let this man go in peace." Viper's face twisted in disbelief, then contempt. "Let him go?" he repeated. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about him anymore." He gestured to the crowd, to the phones recording every word. "This is about you now. About whether Chuck Norris is real or just another Hollywood fake." He stepped back, arms spread wide, inviting attention. "So what's it going to be, hero? You going to show us something? Or just stand there looking constipated?" A few laughs broke the tension momentarily, emboldening Viper further. He turned to his gang, to the crowd, playing the moment for all it was worth. "I think I know why he won't fight," he announced loudly. "He knows he'd get his ass handed to him. Without his stunt double. Without his camera tricks. What's he got? Nothing but a dyed beard and some faded glory." The taunt hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, designed to leave no path but confrontation. Viper turned back to Chuck, triumph already gleaming in his eyes. Certain he had crafted a no-win situation. Fight and risk losing, or walk away and confirm every insult. But Chuck Norris had never played by those rules. With deliberate calm, he turned away from Viper and back to Samuel. "Let me help you get your cart to safer ground, sir," he said, reaching for the handle. The simple act turning his back on Viper, offering help instead of violence, landed like a physical blow. The gang leader stood frozen for a moment, mouth slightly open, as the script he thought he was following suddenly became meaningless. "Hey!" Viper's voice cracked slightly. "Don't you turn your back on me." Chuck continued helping Samuel secure the last of his belongings, his movements unhurried and precise. The complete dismissal, more devastating than any insult or attack, could have been, left Viper sputtering, his carefully constructed persona crumbling at the edges. In desperation, he reached for Chuck's shoulder, fingers just brushing the denim jacket. "I said don't." Chuck's response was so fast, so fluid, that many in the crowd would later swear they didn't see exactly what happened. One moment Viper was reaching. The next, he was off balance, stumbling back a step as Chuck stood exactly where he had been, position unchanged except for a slight shift in his stance. No blow had been thrown. No aggressive move made. Just a simple redirection that left Viper looking clumsy and uncertain. The crowd's energy changed instantly. A collective intake of breath, followed by murmurs and a few scattered claps. Someone in the back whistled softly. Phones adjusted position, zooming in on the two men now facing each other with completely different energy zone, flustered and increasingly desperate. The other calm and immovable. "You think you're something special," Viper spat, his theatrical flair abandoned in favor of raw anger. "But you're nothing but a washed-up has been trying to stay relevant." Chuck met his gaze steadily. "Is that really what this is about?" he asked quietly. "Who's special? Who's relevant? Is that why you knocked over an old man's cart and poured beer on his clothes?" The simple questions, asked without heat or judgment, nevertheless cut to the heart of the matter. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their own complicity in watching the scene unfold without intervention. Viper's face darkened. "This is about respect," he growled. "About people knowing who runs these streets." Chuck nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the statement, while not necessarily agreeing with it. "Respect," he repeated. "Is this what it looks like to you?" He gestured to the scene around them, the scattered belongings still damp with beer, the old man clutching his cart like a lifeline, the gang members on their bikes creating a wall of noise and intimidation, the crowd with their phones raised, hungry for spectacle. "Because from where I stand," Chuck continued, voice level but carrying to everyone present, "respect isn't taken. It's earned. And it doesn't look anything like this." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward through the gathered crowd. A few people nodded. Others looked away, unable to meet the truth in the statement. Even some of the gang members seemed affected, their postures shifting subtly, enthusiasm waning. Viper sensed the changing tide and fought against it with the only weapons he knew: volume and aggression. "Enough talk!" he shouted, fists clenching at his sides. "You want to lecture me about respect? Then earn mine. Right here, right now." He shifted his weight into a fighting stance, hands raising in a gesture that was half invitation, half threat. "Come on, Norris. Show me what you've got. Or walk away and prove me right." The challenge hung in the air, stark and unavoidable. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for Chuck's response. Samuel had managed to position his cart at the edge of the gathered vehicles, poised to leave but watching the confrontation with evident concern. Chuck stood perfectly still, eyes never leaving Viper's face. His expression hadn't changed, carrying neither anger nor fear, just a focused awareness that seemed to take in everything without being affected by it. When he finally moved, it wasn't toward Viper but toward Samuel, each step deliberate and calm. He reached the cart, placing a hand gently on the handle beside the older man's weathered fingers. "Let's get you out of here, sir," he said quietly. "You've had a long night." The simple act, choosing compassion over confrontation, help over harm, spoke volumes without a single word being raised. Chuck began helping Samuel maneuver the cart through the gathered motorcycles, his back once again turned to Viper in a dismissal so complete it was more devastating than any insult. Viper stood frozen, his challenge hanging unanswered in the night air. His carefully constructed persona of dominance and control suddenly revealed as hollow in the face of Chuck's quiet certainty. For a moment, it seemed he might accept the unspoken lesson, might step aside, and let the night end without further escalation. But pride, especially wounded pride, rarely chooses wisdom. "You coward!" Viper snarled, the words tearing from his throat. "You're walking away because you know I'd destroy you." Chuck continued helping Samuel, not acknowledging the taunt. The cart's wheels squeaked against the pavement as they navigated around the bikes, headed toward the relative safety of the sidewalk. Viper's control snapped. With a wordless growl, he lunged forward, arm outstretched to grab Chuck's shoulder and force the confrontation he craved. His fingers never made contact. Chuck moved with such fluid precision that it seemed choreographed: a single pivot, a slight shift of weight, and suddenly, Viper's momentum carried him past his intended target. The gang leader stumbled, catching himself before turning back with rage darkening his features. "You son of a..." he started. But Chuck had already returned to helping Samuel, the brief defensive movement completed without a second glance. The crowd murmured, phones adjusting to capture the moment. A few people chuckled at Viper's stumble, fueling his growing fury. He straightened and stalked toward Chuck with deliberate steps. "I'm talking to you," he shouted, voice echoing between buildings. "Face me. Like a man." Chuck continued guiding Samuel's cart, creating a path through the parked motorcycles, his focus entirely on the task at hand. As if Viper's rage was merely distant traffic, noise noted but irrelevant. Samuel glanced nervously between Chuck and the advancing gang leader. "Maybe you should go," he said quietly. "I can manage from here. Don't want trouble on my account." Chuck's eyes met the older man's, a connection conveying more than words could. "Sometimes trouble finds us whether we want it or not," he replied. "But we choose how we meet it." Behind them, Viper had reached his breaking point. Theatrics abandoned, he charged forward with raw aggression. His arm drew back, fist clenched, aiming for the back of Chuck's head. The collective gasp from the crowd might have warned a lesser man, but Chuck didn't need it. Without turning, without even appearing to look, he ducked, slightly a movement, so economical it seemed almost casual. Viper's punch sailed over his shoulder, the force of the missed blow throwing the gang leader off balance once again. This time, Chuck turned to face him, not with anger or irritation, but with focused attention. He stepped away from the cart, placing himself between Viper and Samuel, hands relaxed at his sides. "That's enough," he said, voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable note of finality. "Walk away. No one needs to get hurt here." Viper, breathing heavily from exertion and rage, stared at Chuck with naked hatred. "You think you can just come into my territory and tell me what to do? You don't know who you're messing with." Chuck's expression remained unchanged. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he replied evenly. "A man who needs to hurt others to feel strong, who mistakes fear for respect." The assessment struck deeper than any physical blow could have. Viper's face contorted, the truth cutting through his armor of bravado and exposing the insecurity beneath. "Shut up!" he shouted, voice cracking slightly. "Just shut your mouth and fight me." Chuck shook his head once, a small gesture of refusal. "That's not why I'm here." Viper's laugh was harsh, disbelieving. "Then why are you here, old man? To save that piece of trash?" He jerked his chin toward Samuel, who watched with quiet dignity, hands still resting on his cart. "To remind you," Chuck answered simply, "and everyone here, that how we treat the most vulnerable among us defines who we are." Several people in the crowd lowered their phones, suddenly uncomfortable with their role as spectators to cruelty. Others exchanged glances, the simple truth cutting through the entertainment value of the conflict. Viper sensed the shift in energy and fought against it with the only tool he knew: escalation. He turned to his gang, who had been watching with growing uncertainty. "Are you hearing this?" he called out, voice rising. "Hollywood here thinks he can come into our neighborhood and preach to us. Tell us how to live." A few gang members revved their engines in response, but the sound lacked conviction. The performative unity was fracturing in the face of Chuck's calm certainty. Viper pressed on, desperate to regain control. Maybe he needs a reminder of how things work in the real world. He reached into his jacket, hand emerging with the gleam of metal switchblade that snapped open with a click that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden hush. The appearance of the weapon changed the atmosphere instantly. The crowd pulled back, a collective retreat from the escalation to potential violence. Even the gang members shifted uneasily, several exchanging glances that suggested this wasn't part of what they had signed up for. Samuel's face paled, his grip on the cart tightening. He had survived on the streets long enough to recognize when situations turned truly dangerous. "Now," Viper continued, his grin returning as he sensed the fear his weapon generated, "let's see how tough Chuck Norris really is when the cameras aren't rolling." He advanced slowly, knife extended, clearly relishing the moment the control regained, the advantage secured. In his mind, he had already won. Either Chuck would back down, confirming every taunt, or he would fight and risk being cut. Chuck remained where he stood, expression unchanged. His eyes tracked the knife with the calm assessment of someone who had faced weapons before and understood their implications fully. His breathing remained steady, his posture neither aggressive nor defensive, simply ready. "Put it away," he said quietly. "You're turning a bad decision into a much worse one." Viper's laugh was sharp, edged with cruelty. "Or what? You'll roundhouse kick me?" He mimicked an exaggerated martial arts move, drawing scattered laughs from his few remaining supporters. "This isn't a movie set, old man. This is real life." Chuck's gaze never wavered. "Yes," he agreed simply. "It is. With real consequences." Something in his tone, no threatening, but absolutely certain, caused a flicker of doubt to cross Viper's face. But pride and fear of losing face drove him forward when instinct might have counseled retreat. "Last chance to walk away, Norris," he said, voice lower now. Performative bravado, replaced by genuine threat. Walk away and admit you're nothing but a fake. Chuck's response was to take a single step forward, closing the distance between them slightly. The move was so unexpected, so contrary to what anyone with sense would do when faced with a knife, that Viper actually took a half-step back before catching himself. "I'm not going anywhere," Chuck said evenly. "Not while you're threatening people." For a heartbeat, the street held its collective breath. Then Viper lunged, knife slashing forward in a wide arc aimed at Chuck's midsection. The attack was fast, fueled by rage and wounded pride, but to Chuck it might as well have been happening in slow motion. He shifted a minimal movement, just enough for the blade to pass harmlessly through the space where he had been. Before Viper could recover his balance, Chuck's hand shot out, gripping the gang leader's wrist with precise pressure. No wasted motion, no dramatic gesture, just an efficient application of leverage that sent a shock of pain up Viper's arm. The knife clattered to the pavement. Viper's expression transformed from confidence to disbelief in an instant. He stared at his empty hand, then at Chuck, who had already released him and stepped back, resuming his neutral stance as if nothing had happened. The street had fallen silent. The only sound, the distant wail of a siren someone in the crowd, had finally called the police. Viper stood frozen, the reality of his defeat sinking in as he looked from the knife on the ground to the man standing calmly before him. In that moment of clarity, as blue lights began to flash at the far end of the street, something changed in Viper's eyes. Not surrender. Not yet. But the first crack in the foundation of his certainty, the beginning of a question, where before there had been only arrogant answers, and in that small opening lay the possibility of something neither man had anticipated when the night began. Not just an end to conflict, but the seed of change. Dawn was still hours away when the biker gang returned to the abandoned warehouse they claimed as their territory. The steel door crashed open as Viper stormed in, kicking an empty beer can across the floor. The other gang members followed at a distance, exchanging wary glances and maintaining an unusual silence. "Anyone want to say something?" Viper demanded, turning to face his crew. No one spoke. The 7 riders stood in a loose semicircle, eyes averted, bodies tense with instinctive caution. "Didn't think so," Viper muttered. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey, took a long swallow, then slammed it down. "That wasn't how it was supposed to go. That old man made us look weak. Made me look weak." Diesel, a tall man with acne scars, cleared his throat hesitantly. "Viper. Man, that was Chuck Norris. You can't expect." "Can't expect what?" Viper cut him off. "Can't expect to win against some washed-up actor? Some 60-something relic living off his glory days?" No one answered. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Rat, the youngest member with the patchy beard, spoke up. "We could go back. Find that homeless guy again. Finish what we started." Viper's gaze fixed on him. "That's small time. That's nothing." He paced the concrete floor with restless energy. "If we're going to fix this, it has to be bigger. Has to make a statement." A slow smile spread across his face. "Has to involve Chuck Norris himself." "How do we even find him?" Diesel asked. "News said he's in town for some charity event tomorrow night. One of those black tie things at the Westbrook Hotel downtown." Snake, the oldest member with graying temples, spoke up. "What exactly are you thinking?" Viper took another long swallow of whiskey. "I'm thinking it's time the Serpents made headlines. Time we showed every and especially Chuck Norris that we're not to be disrespected." "You want to crash a charity event?" Snake's voice remained level, but a crease appeared between his eyebrows. "Who said anything about going in?" Viper countered. "Rich folks gotta park those fancy cars somewhere, and Chuck Norris has to leave sometime." Understanding dawned on the others' faces. On ambush in the parking garage or street outside. away from the main security, but still connected enough to the event to make their point. Could work, Diesel admitted reluctantly. Hit and run. Be gone before cops show up. Rat nodded eagerly. Yeah. And we got the numbers. Even if he's some karate master or whatever, he can't take all of us at once. What's the end goal here? Snake asked. We jump Chuck Norris in a parking garage. Then what? What's the win? Viper's smile faded, replaced by something harder. The win is he learns his lesson. The win is everyone who sees the video knows not to cross the serpents. He stepped closer to Snake. The win is I sleep better knowing I put that smug bastard in his place. Snake held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded on Sano, necessarily in agreement, but in acknowledgement that Viper's mind was made up. All right. How do you want to play it? Scoping session tomorrow afternoon. Check out the hotel, entry points, cameras. Then we wait until the event's winding down, position ourselves, and when Chuck Norris walks out to his car, he made a grabbing motion with his hand. We remind him who really runs this city. The gang's usual energy began to return. Only Snake remained somewhat apart, watching Viper hold court. Something about this felt different, a line being crossed, a boundary pushed too far. As the planning session devolved into drinking and boasting, Snake slipped away quietly, riding into the night alone. Across town, in a modest hotel room, Chuck Norris sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. Yes, he's fine, Chuck was saying. Shaken up. But they got him to the shelter safely. No, I don't think they'll be back tonight. Their leader lost face pretty badly. He listened for a moment, then chuckled softly. No, I didn't have to hurt anyone. Just redirected some energy. The voice on the other end spoke again, and Chuck's expression softened. I know, honey. I'll be careful. It's just one more day. Then I'm on the plane home. Love you too. Get some sleep. He ended the call and moved to the window, looking out at the city spread below a tapestry of lights and shadows. Tonight, his story had briefly collided with that of a homeless man and a biker gang, creating ripples that would continue long after he left town. He moved to the desk where his notes for tomorrow's speech lay open. The charity event was raising money for at-risk youth, programs giving kids alternatives to gangs, addiction, and the streets. Looking at his prepared remarks, Chuck realized the night's encounter had given him something more valuable than carefully crafted phrases, a fresh reminder of why this work mattered. The Westbrook Hotel stood as a monument to old money and new ambition. Tonight, its grand ballroom hosted the annual fundraiser for the City Youth Initiative, bringing together wealthy donors, local celebrities, and community leaders. Chuck arrived early, preferring to get a feel for the space before it filled with people. The event coordinator spotted him immediately, requesting he speak before dinner rather than after, which he readily agreed to. As he adjusted the microphone height on stage, Chuck noticed a familiar figure entering through a side door. Samuel. The older man looked transformed from the night before. He wore a clean button-down shirt and khaki pants, his gray hair neatly combed, his weathered face freshly shaved. He carried himself differently, too still, cautious, but with a dignity that seemed more accessible today. Chuck stepped down from the stage and approached him. Samuel, good to see you. Samuel's face brightened. Mr. Norris, they told me you might be here, but I wasn't sure. Please, call me Chuck. He gestured to Samuel's attire. You're looking well. The shelter had some donations come in. Lady there insisted I take these for tonight. He met Chuck's eyes. I'm working the event. Serving staff. Just for tonight. But it's something. That's excellent. Wouldn't have happened without last night, Samuel continued. After you left, some of those people who helped me on works for the catering company doing this event. She asked if I wanted a night's work. Haven't had anyone ask me that in a long time. The event coordinator reappeared, requesting Chuck for a photo op with the mayor. Before leaving, Chuck turned back to Samuel. "We'll talk more later?" Samuel nodded, something like hope warming his expression. "I'd like that." The next hour passed in a blur of photographs, handshakes, and brief conversations. Just before the program began, Chuck felt a prickle of awareness, that sixth sense that had served him well throughout his life. He looked up, scanning the crowded room. Near the bar stood a large man with graying temples and the solid build of someone familiar with physical labor. Though dressed in a server's uniform, he carried himself differently from the other staff, more watchful, more contained. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Chuck recognized him as one of the bikers from the night before, not Viper, but the older one who had stood slightly apart from the others. The man held Chuck's gaze for a heartbeat, then gave a slight nod before turning away. The interaction confirmed what Chuck had already suspected. The encounter from the previous night wasn't truly over. The coordinator appeared at his elbow. "We're ready for you now, Mr. Norris." As he followed her to the stage, Chuck maintained his calm exterior while his mind processed the implications of the biker's presence. It could be coincidence, but Chuck's instincts suggested otherwise. The mayor introduced him, and Chuck stepped onto the stage to warm applause. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, voice clear and steady. "Supporting our youth isn't just charity. It's an investment in our shared future." As he spoke, Chuck's awareness remained splitfully present for his audience, while maintaining vigilance for whatever might be developing behind the scenes. The older biker's presence suggested others might be positioned elsewhere, perhaps outside, waiting. From the corner of his eye, Chuck noticed Samuel entering with a tray of champagne glasses. He also noted the older biker watching Samuel with an unreadable expression before disappearing through a service door. "We often speak about teaching young people to be strong," he told the audience. "But there are many kinds of strength. The strength to stand up when others sit down. The strength to help when it's easier to walk away. The strength to show compassion when others show cruelty." He concluded to enthusiastic applause, accepting thanks before moving back into the crowd. As guests approached for photos, Chuck maintained his gracious exterior while keeping Samuel in his peripheral vision and noting which exits the older biker had used. Whatever was brewing would likely come to a head when the event ended. Chuck had no intention of being caught unprepared, but neither would he allow concern about what might happen later to diminish his effectiveness now. As the event began winding down, Chuck made his way to the kitchen area. He found Samuel clearing glasses from a tray. "How did it go?" Chuck asked, keeping his voice casual. Samuel looked up with a small smile. "Good. Real good. Been a long time since I did this kind of work. But it came back quick. They asked if I'd be interested in more shifts. Said I was reliable." The pride in his voice was understated but unmistakable. The simple dignity of being useful, of being seen as capable rather than as a problem. "That's excellent news," Chuck said sincerely. "Well deserved." Samuel's eyes shifted briefly to something over Chuck's shoulder, his expression changing subtly. "You should know," he said, voice lowering. "The big one from last night is here. Been working alongside me all evening." "Not the leader, the older one." "I noticed him," Chuck replied. "Has he said anything to you?" Samuel shook his head. "Nothing direct, but he's been watching you. And he took a phone call earlier, stepped outside for it. Seemed tense when he came back." Chuck nodded, absorbing the information without visible concern. "When do you finish here?" "About an hour. Have to help with cleanup. I'll wait and walk you out," Chuck said. The offer delivered casually but with clear intent. Safety in numbers. Samuel looked as if he might protest, then nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You think there's trouble coming?" It wasn't a question, but Chuck answered anyway. "It's a possibility we should prepare for." He placed a reassuring hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Finish your work. I'll handle whatever comes." Chuck made his way through the hotel's opulent lobby to the security desk, where he found a professionally dressed woman with the alert posture of someone with law enforcement background. "Mr. Norris." She greeted him, extending her hand. "Diane Reeves, head of security. Lauren said you wanted to speak with me?" Chuck shook her hand, noting the firm grip and steady gaze. "Thanks for making time. I wanted to give you a heads up about a potential situation." Briefly, he outlined the previous night's encounter with the biker gang and the presence of one of its members on the catering staff tonight. "There's a chance they may be planning something in the parking garage when people leave. Probably just intimidation, but best to be prepared." Reeves listened with professional attention, then nodded crisply. "Appreciate the information. I'll double the garage patrol immediately and position staff at all exits." She studied him for a moment. "Should I call for police presence as well?" Chuck considered, then shook his head. "Let's not escalate unnecessarily. Extra hotel security should be sufficient deterrent. If they're smart, they'll see the increased presence and reconsider." "And if they're not smart?" Reeves asked, one eyebrow raised. Chuck's smile was small but genuine. "Then we'll handle it." When the event concluded, Chuck found Samuel in the kitchen, hanging up his serving jacket. "Ready?" Chuck asked. Samuel nodded, fatigue evident in his face but a quiet satisfaction there too. "Been a long time since I put in a full shift like that. Feels good though." They walked together through the now empty ballroom. As they approached the lobby, Chuck noticed Reeves by the main desk, giving instructions to 2 security guards. She caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. "Preparations made." "My car's in the garage," Chuck said as they reached the elevator bank. "I can give you a ride back to the shelter." Samuel hesitated. A lifetime of self-reliance, warring with practical need. "Don't want to put you out." "No trouble at all," Chuck assured him. "It's on my way." They entered the elevator along with a security guard who positioned himself casually in the corner. Chuck pressed the button for the garage level, and they descended in companionable silence. When the doors opened, Chuck's senses immediately heightened. The garage was well lit but vast, concrete pillars creating numerous blind spots between rows of parked vehicles. The security guard exited first, scanning the immediate vicinity before stepping aside. "This way," Chuck said, guiding Samuel toward his car. They walked at an unhurried pace, Chuck maintaining a relaxed exterior, while his awareness expanded to encompass every sound, every movement in his peripheral vision. They had covered about half the distance when the sound of multiple motorcycle engines shattered the garage's relative quiet. The roar bounced off concrete walls, making it difficult to pinpoint the source initially, but Chuck knew this was what he had been expecting. "Stay close," he told Samuel, continuing forward rather than retreating. The security guard behind them spoke urgently into his radio. The motorcycles appeared from around a concrete pillar, 5 of them, moving in formation, headlights cutting bright paths through the garage's fluorescent dimness. At their center rode Viper, his face set in grim determination as he led his reduced crew directly toward Chuck and Samuel. The bike circled once, twice, creating a tightening loop before coming to a stop, engines still running. The security guard moved forward, hand going to his hip where a taser was holstered. "This is private property," he called out firmly. "I need you all to leave immediately." Viper's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "We're just here to have a word with our old friend Chuck." His gaze shifted to Samuel, contempt flashing across his features. "And look, he's still babysitting the trash collector. How sweet." Chuck placed a calming hand on the security guard's shoulder. "I've got this," he said quietly, then stepped forward to address Viper directly. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Yeah, well, unfinished business and all that." Viper dismounted, his movements carrying coiled tension. "You embarrassed me in front of my crew, in front of my neighborhood. That doesn't stand. Chuck studied him, noting the slight unsteadiness in his stance, the dilated pupils. You've been drinking, he observed, voice neutral. Dutch courage, one of the other bikers muttered, earning a sharp glare from Viper. Doesn't matter what I've been doing, Viper snapped. What matters is what I'm about to do. He reached into his jacket and pulled out brass knuckles, fitting them over his right hand with practiced ease. This time, he continued, voice lowering to a growl, it won't be so easy for you to dance away. This time, you're going to bleed. Chuck remained where he stood, expression unchanged. Is that really what you want? To add assault charges to whatever else you've got pending? To risk serious jail time over wounded pride? Viper's laugh held no humor. Always talking. That's your problem. Norris, you think words solve anything. He gestured to his gang, who began to dismount, forming a loose semicircle. Sometimes, all that matters is who's left standing. The security guard spoke urgently into his radio again, likely calling for backup. From the elevator bank came the sound of doors opening, more security responding to the situation. But they were still outnumbered, and Viper seemed beyond caring about consequences. Chuck turned slightly to Samuel, keeping his voice low. When I move, head for the elevator. Don't look back. Samuel nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding without question. Viper advanced a step, brass knuckles gleaming under the garage lights. No more talk. No more chances. Just you and me, old man. Chuck faced him squarely, hands still relaxed at his sides. It doesn't have to be this way. You can still walk away from this. Funny, Viper replied, a vicious smile spreading across his face. I was about to tell you the same thing. With that, he lunged forward, arms swinging in a wide arc, aimed directly at Chuck's head. The brass knuckles whistled through the air, a potentially devastating blow if it connected. It never did. Chuck moved with the same fluid efficiency he had displayed the night before, but this time there was a subtle difference. Rather than simply evading, he redirected, catching Viper's wrist mid-swing and using the gang leader's own momentum to propel him past, off balance and vulnerable. Before Viper could recover, Chuck delivered a single precise strike to the back of his shoulder, not enough to cause lasting damage, but perfectly placed to send a shock of pain down the arm holding the brass knuckles. Viper's hand spasmed open, the weapon clattering to the concrete floor. Go, Chuck said to Samuel, who immediately began moving toward the elevators where additional security personnel were now emerging. The other bikers hesitated, caught between loyalty and self-preservation. One moved forward uncertainly, only to be intercepted by a security guard. Another reached into his jacket, but froze when a guard called out a warning about police being en route. Viper recovered his balance, turning back to face Chuck with fury etched into every line of his face. You think this changes anything? You're still going down. He charged again, abandoning any pretense of technique in favor of raw aggression. This time, Chuck didn't merely evade, he countered, his movements so precise and controlled that they almost appeared gentle despite their effectiveness. A palm strike to redirect, a sweep to unbalance, a controlled takedown that left Viper on the concrete, winded but unhurt, looking up with a mixture of rage and dawning comprehension that he was completely outmatched. The garage had fallen silent, except for the idling motorcycles and Viper's labored breathing. The remaining bikers stood frozen, watching as their invincible commander lay subdued on the ground, defeated not by superior violence, but by superior control. And in that moment of suspended action, a new voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Viper. All heads turned to see Snake stepping out from behind a concrete pillar. He had changed from his server's uniform back into jeans and a leather jacket, though without the gang insignia the others wore. Snake, Viper growled, struggling to his feet. Where the hell were you? You were supposed to be our inside man. Snake approached slowly, his expression grim. I was inside all right. Long enough to see what these people are actually doing with that charity money. Long enough to think about whether this is really who we want to be. He gestured toward Chuck. This man came to help kids avoid ending up like us. And we're going to jump him for it? For what? Because he made you look bad. Snake shook his head. That's not strength. That's just sad. Viper's face contorted with rage. You turning on us now, after all these years? Not turning on anyone. Snake replied steadily. Just drawing a line. Some things we don't do. This should be one of them. He turned to the other bikers, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Police are 2 minutes out. Anyone who wants to avoid spending the night in lockup should leave now. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the bikers remounted his motorcycle, revving the engine once before riding toward the exit. Another followed. Then a third, until only Viper and one loyal follower remained. Cowards! Viper shouted after them. All of you! Snake shook his head. Something like pity crossing his weathered features. No, Viper. They're just smart enough to know when a fight isn't worth having. He glanced at Chuck, a silent communication passing between them. Some battles you were never going to win. Security had fully surrounded them now, and in the distance, the wail of police sirens could be heard approaching. The confrontation was effectively over. Diffused as much by Snake's intervention as by Chuck's restrained response to the attack. Viper seemed to deflate, the frantic energy that had driven him to this point suddenly evaporating as reality set in. This isn't over, he muttered. But the words lacked conviction. Chuck met his gaze steadily. It can be, he said simply. Right here. Right now. Your choice. For a long moment, Viper stood poised between options. Then, with a muttered curse, he turned away, shouldering past Snake toward his motorcycle. His remaining follower fell in behind him, both men mounting their bikes with the stiff movements of those suppressing fury. Sir, one of the security guards called out, the police will want to speak with you. Viper gunned his engine in response, the roar echoing through the garage like the growl of a wounded animal. Without another word, he and his last loyal rider sped toward the exit, disappearing into the night moments before police vehicles pulled into the garage entrance. 3 months later, the first real snow of winter dusted the city streets with a delicate crystalline powder. Christmas decorations adorned storefronts and lampposts, their cheerful colors pushing back against the early darkness of December evenings. In the Westbrook Hotel's kitchen, Samuel moved with confident efficiency, his knife making quick work of the herbs needed for the evening special. The white chef's jacket he wore no longer borrowed but issued with his name embroidered on the chest stood in stark contrast to his dark skin, crisp and professional. Jenkins, called the executive chef from across the bustling kitchen. How are we coming on that salmon prep? Almost finished, chef, Samuel replied, not looking up from his precise work. 5 minutes. The chef nodded, satisfied. Moving on to check another station. 3 months into his employment, Samuel had established himself as one of the kitchen's most reliable workers. Steady, meticulous, never late, never complaining about the long hours or demanding pace. His trial period had ended 2 weeks ago, with a permanent offer and a small raise that he had accepted with quiet dignity. His shift ended at 7, and after changing from his kitchen whites into jeans and a sweater, Samuel made his way through the hotel's elegant lobby toward the exit. The contrast between his current passage through these spaces and his first entrance, brought in through side doors as part of the catering staff, nervous and uncertain, was not lost on him. Evening, Mr. Jenkins. The doorman greeted him, holding the door with a respectful nod. Cold one tonight. Sure is, Tom, Samuel agreed, zipping his jacket against the winter chill. Stay warm. These small exchanges, the normal, everyday acknowledgments that most people took for granted, had become quietly precious to Samuel. After years of invisibility on the streets, of being looked through rather than seen, the simple courtesy of being recognized carried profound meaning. He walked briskly through the snow-dusted streets, his destination not his apartment but the East Side shelter, where he had lived during his transition back to stability. Every Thursday evening for the past 2 months, he returned there not as a resident but as a volunteer, helping serve dinner, and sometimes, when asked, sharing his story with those still finding their way back. Tonight, however, was special, the shelter's annual Christmas dinner. A more elaborate affair than the usual meals, with donated food from local restaurants, modest gifts for residents, and a general atmosphere of celebration, despite the difficult circumstances that had brought people there. As Samuel approached the familiar red brick building, he noticed the entrance had been decorated with greenery and white lights, creating a welcoming glow against the early evening darkness. Inside, the usual institutional functionality had been softened with tablecloths, centerpieces, and more lights strung around the dining area's perimeter. "Samuel," Director Michaels called, spotting him immediately. "Right on time. As always. We've got quite the crew tonight." Samuel hung his coat and followed the director's gesture toward the serving area, where several volunteers were already preparing to distribute the holiday meal. Among them, wearing a shelter apron over his flannel shirt and jeans, stood Snakor Robert Miller, as Samuel now knew him, though the nickname had stuck even as the former biker had transitioned to his new role. "Jenkins." Snake greeted him with a nod and the hint of a smile. "They put me on mashed potato duty. Said it's hard to mess up." Samuel returned the smile, noting the changes in the man since their first encounter 3 months ago. The defensive tension that had characterized Snake's posture had eased, replaced by a more grounded presence. He had kept his beard but trimmed it neatly, and the perpetual wariness in his eyes had softened, though not disappeared entirely. "You'd be surprised," Samuel replied, taking his position at the serving line. "I've seen some tragic mashed potatoes in my day." Snake's laugh was brief, but genuine, another change from the man who had once stood silently in Viper's shadow, observing but rarely participating in the gang's cruel humor. As they prepared for the dinner service, Samuel observed the easy way Snake now interacted with the shelter staff and other volunteers. Not completely comfortable yet, perhaps there remained an edge of caution in his manner. The habit of a man accustomed to watching his back, but engaged in a way that spoke of genuine commitment rather than obligation. "How's the job hunt going?" Samuel asked during a quiet moment before the residents began filing in. Snake shrugged, a gesture that carried less resignation than it might have months ago. "Had an interview at the shipyard yesterday. Nothing fancy, just dock work, but the foreman seemed interested when I told him I can fix engines." A cautious optimism colored his voice. "Said they'd let me know after the holidays." "That's good," Samuel said, genuinely pleased. "They'd be lucky to have you." Snake accepted the encouragement with a slight nod, still unused to positive reinforcement, but learning to receive it. "We'll see. Until then, the shelter's letting me do maintenance work in exchange for the room. Keeps me busy." He hesitated, then added, "Keeps me away from old haunts, old habits." The simple acknowledgement of vulnerability, something the Snake of 3 months ago would never have admitted, spoke volumes about the journey he had undertaken since that night in the hotel garage. Like Samuel's, it wasn't a dramatic transformation but a series of small, daily choices accumulating into meaningful change. "Speaking of old habits," Samuel said, careful to keep his tone neutral. "Heard anything about Viper?" Snake's expression tightened slightly, but he answered evenly. "Court dates next month. Looking at 5 to 7 for the convenience store robbery, plus the assault charges from that night at the hotel." He shook his head, a mixture of regret and resignation in the gesture. Could have been worse. Could have been better too, if he'd made different choices. Before Samuel could respond, Director Michaels called for everyone's attention, announcing that residents would begin arriving for dinner momentarily. The conversation shifted to the practical tasks at hand, serving food, ensuring everyone got their share, creating the atmosphere of dignity and welcome that was the shelter's hallmark, despite limited resources. As residents filed in, men and women of all ages, some with children, all bearing the visible and invisible marks of hard circumstances, Samuel found himself reflecting on the strange, unpredictable path that had led him to this moment. Just a few months ago, he had been on the other side of the serving line, one of the recipients rather than the providers, unsure if he would ever find his way back to stability. Now here he stood, gainfully employed, housed, and able to give back, not through grand gestures or significant financial contributions, but through the simple act of being present, of serving others with the same respect he had once been shown when he needed it most. Near the end of the dinner service, as residents were enjoying their meals and volunteers were beginning to clean up, the shelter's front door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a new arrival. Samuel looked up, momentarily startled to see a familiar face-on he had not expected to encounter again. Chuck Norris stood in the entrance, removing his wool coat and shaking snowflakes from his shoulders. He wore simple clothing, jeans, boots, a dark sweater, but carried himself with the same quiet assurance that had been so evident during their brief but significant acquaintance. Director Michaels hurried over to greet him, clearly surprised but pleased by the unexpected visitor. They spoke briefly, Chuck handing over what appeared to be an envelope-a donation. Samuel guessed before scanning the room with observant eyes that quickly found their targets. He approached the serving area where Samuel and Snake stood watching his arrival with matching expressions of surprise. "Mr. Jenkins!" Chuck greeted Samuel warmly, extending his hand. "You're looking well." Samuel clasped his hand firmly, genuine pleasure displacing his initial shock. "Didn't expect to see you again," he admitted. "What brings you back to town?" "Another charity event," Chuck replied with a small smile. "Seems to be becoming a habit. But when I heard about the shelter's Christmas dinner, I wanted to stop by." His gaze shifted to Snake, acknowledging him with a nod. "Mr. Miller, good to see you." Snake returned the nod, his usual guardedness tempered by evident respect. "Likewise. Didn't figure you for the surprise visit type." Chuck's smile deepened slightly. "I'm full of surprises." He gestured to the room around them, the residents enjoying their meal, the festive decorations, the atmosphere of community despite difficult circumstances. "This looks like a success." "It is," Samuel confirmed, pride evident in his voice. "Best turnout we've had for the holiday dinner. Local restaurants donated most of the food. Communities really stepped up this year." As they spoke, Director Michaels approached with a request for Chuck to say a few words to the assembled residents and volunteers. After a moment's consideration, Chuck agreed, following the director to the front of the room, where a microphone had been set up for announcements. The room quieted as Director Michaels introduced their surprise guest, excitement rippling through both residents and volunteers at the unexpected presence of a celebrity in their midst. When Chuck took the microphone, however, his words carried none of the practiced polish of a public figure making an appearance, but rather the genuine warmth of someone who understood the value of the community gathered before him. "Thank you for letting me join you tonight," he began simply. "I won't take much of your time. The food is much more interesting than anything I might say." This drew appreciative chuckles from the audience. "But I wanted to share one thought with you on this winter evening." He paused, his gaze moving over the assembled faces, not with pity or distance, but with genuine connection. "When I was a young man just starting out in martial arts, my teacher told me something I've never forgotten. He said that true strength isn't measured by how many opponents you can defeat, but by how many people you can lift up." The room had fallen completely silent. Residents and volunteers alike focused on his words. "I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world, to meet all kinds of people from all walks of life. And I've found that the strongest communities aren't necessarily the wealthiest or the most powerful. They're the ones where people look out for each other, where they recognize that we all stumble sometimes and we all need a hand up. His gaze found Samuel and Snake, standing side by side at the serving line, two men whose lives had intersected with his briefly but significantly, who had each found their own kind of strength in the aftermath of that encounter. The real heroes aren't on movie screens or magazine covers, Chuck continued, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. They're the ones who get up every day and choose to be better than they were yesterday, who reach back to help others along the path they've traveled, who recognize that dignity isn't something that can be taken away by circumstances. It's something we honor in ourselves and each other, regardless of where we find ourselves. With that, he concluded with simple holiday wishes, and thanks to the shelter staff and volunteers, then stepped away from the microphone to warm applause. As he made his way back through the crowd, stopping occasionally to shake hands or exchange words with residents who approached him, Samuel felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. In the taxi later that night, moving through snow-covered streets toward his hotel, Chuck watched the city pass by his window, the holiday decorations glowing against the winter night, people hurrying along sidewalks bundled against the cold, moments of human connection playing out in storefronts and street corners. His brief return had confirmed what he had hoped, that the ripples from that night 3 months ago continued to spread outward in ways both seen and unseen. Samuel finding his footing again, Snake choosing a different path, even Viper, perhaps, beginning the long journey toward redemption. Small victories in the grand scheme of things, perhaps, but real ones nonetheless. Lives changed, not through dramatic intervention or public spectacle, but through the quieter, more enduring power of example, of dignity recognized and respected, of strength defined not by dominance, but by its capacity to lift others. And in that quiet certainty, Chuck found a satisfaction deeper than any applause, any accolade, any public recognition could provide. The knowledge that sometimes the most meaningful victories were the ones that would never be counted or celebrated, but that changed lives nonetheless. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.